talking about his marriage to Khadija radiallahu anha, and how life was really at, he was in his prime with regards to the dunya world. He had reputation, he was Sadiq al-Amin, he had status, he now married to Khadija bin Khuwaylid, so he had money, everything was going perfect for him. And even so, we talked about the rebuilding of the Kaaba, he was selected as a representative to decide amongst them. So they trusted him in their affairs. He enjoyed this luxury for a number of years, until now finally the revelation was going to come. And this sometimes changes everything. When you stand up for truth, you're now an enemy to certain people. And we'll see the divide happening, not only between those who are poor in society, but even those who are rich. We'll see, inshallah. So he goes up to the mountain of Khatirah in solitude, trying to meditate, trying to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not knowing how to exactly worship. He knows there's a creator, but he doesn't understand the avenue to him. And so, as a man, we talked about this, every man needs that moment where he can get away from everything and kind of reflect, recognize his purpose. And those who forget Allah, they forget themselves. Allah says, "La takunu kalladhina nasu Allah." Don't be like those who forgot Allah. So Allah made them forget themselves. So they become slaves to everything else except the one they're supposed to be slave to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he goes into this mountain for weeks at a time, and sometimes months. And Khadija is tending to him, caring for him. He goes down to get food, comes back. Sometimes she goes up there. And during this time, he's getting dreams that are coming true vividly. He would get a dream and it would come true exactly how he dreamt it. And so this was preparing him for what was to come. On one of the nights, Khatirah, we know it was a Ramadan because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr." And we know it was a Monday because when he was asked, "Why does he fast on Mondays?" he says, "Because that's the day I was born, that's the day revelation came." So we know it's a Monday as well. And obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala picked the perfect time. He sends Jibreel, and all he hears is recite. And we mistranslate it sometimes to read, but the Prophet doesn't know how to read, and Jibreel knows he's not. So really, it's him saying recite. And this is very interesting. This translation helps us to prove to non-Muslims, right, that in their Bible, and we talked about this in Deuteronomy 18, there is a verse in the Bible that says we will send a prophet like him, like Musa alayhi salam, in reference to him. And it is said there, we will put our words into his mouth. So this is clear. This is him. Basically, he's saying, I don't know how to read. He keeps repeating it. Then Jibreel squeezes him and says, recite Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Read in the name of the Lord who created. And so the one who created man from a clot. And so the verse continue. This is literally the Prophet speaking what Allah is telling him to speak. He doesn't know these words. He doesn't know how to read or write. He's saying exactly what Allah is telling him to say. And at this time, he's frightened. As we know, he doesn't know what he has seen. He thinks he's perhaps possessed. Has he gone mad? He goes running down back to his house in Mecca. He's trembling. He's afraid, and he asks Khadija to cover him up. And he tells her what happened. And she says, "There's no way you can be possessed." And then she gives him the reasons. He says, "You are good to the orphans. You take care of those who are in need. You support those who have burdens, and all of the good things that you do." She comforted him, and this was a great lesson for all men. We talked about this before. Everybody needs a partner to confide in. The Prophet ﷺ was the most manliest of men. In war and battle, they would hide behind him in the toughest of moments. But yet he is finding comfort in his wife. So everybody needs a support system. So the Prophet ﷺ is leading towards his wife Khadija, who's been there with him since day one. And she's now comforting him, giving him the confidence. So now, after a few days later, he's looking again to see where Jibreel is going to come from. He wanders in the valleys of Mecca, searching for this message again. He knows it's something great. Some say 40 days passed by when he didn't get anything. And then finally, when he went up, he saw Jibreel again in his original form. And this time, he runs back down again, and he's saying, "Cover me up." He's trembling, he's cold. And the voice says to him, "Ya ayyuhal mudaththir, O you who are wrapped up, who's cloaked up, qum fa'andir, stand and warn, rabbaka fakabbir, and your Lord glorified, wa thiyabaka fatahhir, and your clothes purified, wa rujza fahjur, and idols abandon them, وَلَا تَسْتَمْنُ تَسْتَكْثُرْ, and don't be someone who propagates favors on people so you can ask for them in return something else. So all of these verses are coming down. This is the second revelation. This is basically symbolizing it's time for you to come out of your comfort zone. There's a big mission that you have to warn the people. And we have to remind ourselves, sometimes, I know life is good here in the US, we've established ourselves, we made nice homes, we have nice incomes, but we can't get comfortable. We have to come out of our comfort zone because the Prophet says, those who are like me will recite, tell people about me, even if it be one ayah. So that comfort zone that we're in, we have to come out of it in order to fulfill the prophetic mission of continuing and being the messengers after the messenger. And so at this time, it's clear to him that he is a prophet. He goes to Khadija, who then takes him to her cousin Warqa bin Nawfal. And here's a trick question. Who's the first person to accept Islam? Many people will say Khadija. First man, I should say. Who's the first man to accept Islam? Many will say Abu Bakr, right? But the Prophet in a narration, he says, I saw Warqa bin Nawfal in Jannah with nice garments. Which means what? He had already accepted Islam. Because when Khadija brought him to her, and he was a learned man, he knew about the Jews and Christians in the past, he says, the one who came to you is the one who came to the prophets before you. And I wish I would be alive to be there to support you when your people drive you out. So he said, why would my people drive me out? He was confused. He didn't understand. He said, my people love me. I'm a sadiq al-amin. I'm the one that everybody loves now. He says, no, nobody has come with what you have come with, except that he will inherit enemies, right? Or he will be driven out. And so the Prophet had no idea he was even a prophet at that time. But Warqa is telling him, based on the pattern of the past, you will be an enemy to your people. And so the da'wah began at first with his family. So he converted his friend Abu Bakr, who was a long-time friend of his. Zayd, who was an adopted child of his, Khadija, obviously his wife. Ali, who was also an adopted son, he took him from Abu Talib and raised him. So all the closest people to him are now starting to convert. And Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, these are the early Muslims. He goes, some of the Sahaba hear this message and they just love the call, they love the message because they're sincere people who understand. Abu Bakr himself, later after he becomes Muslim, he goes out and gets about 7 of the 10 Mubashirun al-Jannah. So he gets Uthman, who's his business partner, he gets Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, he gets Talha, he gets Zubair. So he gets a bunch of these people who are considered the top class of Quraysh. Now, at the same time, this da'wah being secretive or private, I would say, in the house of Dar al-Arqam, one of the Sahabi who hosted the early Muslims, the Prophet would come teach them a new ayah that he learned himself. And he would say it just like Allah taught him, no additions, no subtractions. And people never heard these sort of beautiful words. And the words in Arabic, like I said, they were designed to move. They understood immediately this is not poetry, this is not any kind of word they've heard before. It only can come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Muslims are, amassing small and gradually, and Abu Lahab and others are looking at this and they're hearing this message. Immediately they understand the threat. And Imam Sha'rawi, he says, Abu Jahl knew what La ilaha illallah meant more than the Muslims today. He understood the implications of this word. And he felt not a threat in the short term, but in the long term. He could foresee where this was going. Remember I told you in Surah Al-Maryam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about that they took idols as gods so they could maintain status quo. That there is a class system. We are the elites, we control this economy, we control this sort of, when people pay homage, we control who's who. You're a slave, you have your class, I'm an elite, I have my class. All of this so they can stay in power. And you see it today, as complex as it may seem, it all stems to this basic thing that we create for you false idols. Sometimes it's in the form of music artists, right? We control your minds so that we can stay in power, right? And we give you puppets for leaders, right? So that you don't wake up, you don't change it. If anybody says something, we're going to threaten him, we're going to jail him, and maybe kill him, right? So that way they can remain in power. All of it, it's the same playbook as Shaitan has stated here. And so, وَاتَّخَذُوا آلِهَةً لِيَكُونُ لَهُمْ عِزَّةً. Allah said they took idols so they can become for them a source of izzah. That's the reason they can tell you what to do. They can tell you who's boss and who's not. And so all this is a control mechanism. And so Abu Jahl understood the implication of La ilaha illallah. He's now not threatened because it's private, right? So he's not going to make moves just yet, but he's observing from afar. And he's making fun of this new way, but it's not until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the Prophet, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ, and now Muhammad moved from this private da'wah to now warn your family. And when him saying family is general Quraysh, all of Quraysh are related. We talked about it at the beginning, how they come from Hussein. And so what does he do? The Prophet first calls for a banquet. He makes a feast, he sacrifices a lamb, and calls his family Banu Hashim. Banu Hashim, they gather, and as he's about to go ahead and make that speech, Abu Lahab's uncle senses what he's going to do. He stands up and he starts distracting people, and he says, "We're busy, we have to go." And he makes this kind of crush of the plan, and he leaves, and people leave with him. So the Prophet calls them again for another invitation. This time, the Prophet speaks before Abu Lahab can speak. And so the Prophet is telling them what they've been hearing secretly all this time, and telling them about Islam and how, just the basic tenets of Islam. And at that point, some of them obviously object. So the Prophet now has to call the general population. He climbs to the mountain of Safa on one occasion, and whenever you climb the mountain of Safa, there's a big announcement that's going to be made. No one climbs up unless they have a major announcement. So the people start assembling, and he's calling each tribe, Banu Hashim, the dog, Banu Shams, and all the tribes are coming to hear what's happening. What does the Sadiq al-Amin, what does the most truthful one have to say to us? And he says to them, "What would I tell you?" And we know the famous narration. If there was an army behind me ready to attack me, and they said, "We believe you. We prepare and believe. You've never told us a lie prior to this." And so he says, "Will I give you the warning of punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I am the messenger of Allah?" And he basically tells them the message of Islam. Upon that, we know Abu Lahab threw some dirt on him. He says, "Tabbat lak," that may you be perished. You brought us for this. And so that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately responds to him by the surah, "Tabbat yada abi lahab wa tab." May the hands of Abu Lahab be perished. مَا أَغْنَى عَنْهُ مَالُهُ وَمَا كَسَبَ. His wealth will avail him or will it. And subhanAllah, this is a miracle. Nobody realizes, but Abu Lahab could have easily became Muslim and disproved the Quran. He could have said, "Oh, now I'm Muslim, so khalas. The Quran must be wrong because it has eternally cursed me." But he couldn't do that. It didn't occur to him, even as an enemy of Islam, to do that, and he remained cursed all his life. So at the beginning, the Prophet saw his Muslim Sahabis being persecuted. It was hard for him to watch. Khabbab ibn Arad, a blacksmith, who used to be dragged just because of his faith until his skin would peel. Sumayya, which was a freed slave of Banu Makhzum, Abu Jahl would take her and her husband Yasir, and he would torture them publicly. On one occasion, he tortured them so much she couldn't take it. She said something to him, and he killed her. He stabbed her in front of everyone. She was the first martyr in Islam. Bilal ibn Rabah, his slave master Umayyah, when he found out he had accepted Islam, took him in the middle of the day, where it was the hottest, put a boulder on his chest until he would remove himself from that kalima. But all he was saying was Ahad al-Ahad, which later became the slogan of the Battle of Badr. Only one, and Allah honored him then to make the first azan. So all of these early Muslims, out of the 100,000 Sahabis that we know of towards the end of the Prophet's life, we only know a few names, to be honest, in comparison to these 100,000. And these are the names Allah chose for us to be examples. I always say, when you name your daughter Sumayya, you name her after Sumayya because it represents strength, right? Resolve. Had these people not been resilient in the early phase, we would not be Muslims today. Because their resilience, and these are our stars, even though some of them were from the poor class, they represented what it meant to hold on to faith at the beginning. And now, when we look at our faith, we have to compare and say to ourselves, are we going through trials like that? Of course not. Can we withstand? And when we look at them, we draw examples to teach us strength. Teach us that if they could do that, we can surely do a little bit, right? If they can risk their lives and go through torture, we can do it. And the Prophet ﷺ would also tell them, Khabbab, on one occasion he complained, he says, "O Messenger of Allah, how long has this going to be?" He says, "Be patient, Khabbab. Those before you used to be cut in half and saw. They used to be brought because of their faith and be cut in two. And so this gave them the strength to carry on. It was hard. The Prophet made dua to Allah. He says, "Oh Allah, give honor to one of the two Umars. We need one of the two Umars." And this he was talking about either Amr ibn Hisham, Abu Jahl, or Umar ibn Khattab. The Prophet always sought people who could bring izzat, glory, and honor to the Muslims. What happened was, on a beautiful occasion, in Hamza coming back from a hunt, he was the uncle, he was one of the warriors. He heard Abu Jahl had been making fun of the Prophet ﷺ in public. So Hamza comes, he's told, he goes and hits Abu Jahl with his bow, and he says, "I now am part of the faith of my nephew, Muhammad ﷺ." And this is sometimes a lesson for us. Sometimes people convert for different reasons, but once they convert, your iman can grow. So don't discount anybody's conversion. Oh, he just converted because he wanted to get married, or he just converted because of this, and he just converted because of that. Allah knows what's in the hearts. He converted, alhamdulillah, Allah brought him in some way, and now he can now finally develop, because it's hard to change, really, right? So Hamza, just because his nephew was being bullied by Abu Jahl, he says, "Now I'm going to be on the side of my nephew. What are you going to do?" And so Abu Jahl walked away. So it was a big honor. A few days later, Umar radiallahu anhu, he had some small signs of exposure to the Quran. In a narration by Imam Ahmed, one day he was going, he had a drinking problem. One day he's going out, he's like, "Let's go get some drinks." He's trying to meet up with friends. He goes to one of the friends, he doesn't find him. He goes to the guy who sells the wine, he doesn't find him. So he says, "You know what, let me just go to the Kaaba, I want to do some tawaf." Like I said, Jahiliyyah tawaf is different. So he goes in the middle of the night, and he hears the Prophet ﷺ is praying, reading the Quran. And he says, "This is my chance to get." And so he's creeping up behind the Prophet ﷺ, and all he hears is the Quran. And he was reciting from Surah Al-Haqqa. And now, they've never heard this sort of rhythmic, and this is Meccan Surah, they have these rhythmic pauses that are strong. And almost like after each stop, there's a moment for you to think. And then he's listening, he's like, "What is this?" And he says these beautiful words in his mind, and he says he must be a poet. Then the ayah comes in Surah Al-Haqqa, what is it? وَمَا هُوَ بِشَاعِرٍ. He is not a poet. And he says he must be a sorcerer. وَمَا هُوَ بِقَوْلِ كَاهِنٍ. It's as if Allah is talking to him, and the Prophet does not even realize it. But every ayah he's saying is addressing a thought in Umar's head. And so he immediately walks away, but it had an athar to him. Later on, and Umar was someone who persecuted the Muslims. People couldn't believe he would be Muslim. One day, somehow that light wasn't there, and he wanted to kill the Messenger. He needed determination. His uncle Abu Jahl had brainwashed him, thinking, because Umar is the nephew of Abu Jahl, from a different line, from his mother's side. And so he's much older, Abu Jahl, and he's brainwashing him. And Umar is someone who, he can definitely do damage once he believes in something. And so he tells him Muhammad has separated father and son, he separated society. And Abu Jahl was known as someone who respected their laws. He was someone who honored the laws of Jahiliyyah and the tribes and the law of Abdul Muttalib and so forth. So he was very convincing, and he spoke much like some right-wingers today. They'll start saying, "You're taking our principles or our beliefs, and just twist it, make you seem like the good guy, the bad guy, the bad guy. So you don't really know what to believe." So Umar was a prey to this. He decided to one day, once and for all, kill Muhammad ﷺ. He meets a Sahabi who is a secret Muslim. When Umar tells him of his plan, he wants to distract him by any means. So he says, "Why don't you start with your sister, Fatima, who has accepted Islam?" So he got angry. He said, "My own sister accepted Islam?" So he goes to the house of Fatima, and she's married to a good friend of his, who is later going to be one of the 10 Mubashirun in Jannah. His name is Sa'id ibn Zayd, right? He's one of the 10 guaranteed paradise. So Sa'id and Fatima, his sister, are learning Quran from Khabbab ibn Arat in the house. And he hears it from outside, he bursts the door, they hide Khabbab, he hits Sa'id, and then he goes and hits her. She starts bleeding and he starts to feel sorry for her. At that point, there was an opening in the heart. He says, show me what you were just reciting. And she says, I can't show you until you purify yourself. And so he goes on to purify himself, and then he begins to read, I believe, the Surah, beautiful words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's talking about the story of Musa. And Umar always found a very strong connection with Musa. They had similar personalities. And so immediately he decided that he was going to be Muslim, just from the words of the Quran. That's how powerful the words of the Quran are. Even someone like Umar, who they never expected to be Muslim, his heart softened. And so he went to the house of the Prophet, and Hamza was there. Actually, it wasn't the house of the Prophet, it was one of the Sahabas they had gathered in his house. Hamza saw that Umar was coming, he was armed, he was ready to defend the Prophet. He walked in the door, and the Prophet held him, and the Prophet was strong. He held him and he says, isn't it time for your son Khattab to finally accept Islam? And he says, I have testified there is no one worthy of worship except Allah. Muhammad is his last messenger. This was a beautiful thing because now you have Hamza and you have Umar. So Umar immediately, when embracing Islam, he said, "Oh Messenger of Allah, why do we have to hide? This isn't time to be public with our Islam." And so they decided, let's go out. And one group was led by Hamza, and one group led by Umar, and you could see the kuffar of Quraysh are shocked. Umar, they lost two of the great warriors of Quraysh, and they would march to the Kaaba where they would publicly worship. This gave strength and resolve to the early Muslims, the conversion of Umar and Hamza. For the sake of time, inshallah, we will continue next week. The attempts by Quraysh to now negotiate with the Prophet. They realized, okay, let's see if we can make a deal with him. We can compromise. We'll worship your Lord 1 year, we worship our Lord 1 year. That's what Qul Ya Ayyuhal Kafirun came down. Once that didn't work, the Prophet never compromised. It led to a boycott, which led to the year of sorrow, which is the death of Khadija and Abu Talib, which then led to Ta'if, and then eventually led to Islam and Mi'raj. That was almost the last year of Makkah. Inshallah, we'll try to cover all that next week before Ramadan, so that we can start with the Medina period afterwards, inshallah. So these are just lessons. If anybody has any reflections or additions to this, please feel free to share. Most of us have covered Seerah, so maybe you have some gems to add to this.
Yeah, is there a miracle that happens? I've heard that there was a miracle in the Meccan period where there was some scroll that had writing on it, and there were ants that ate it up, and they ate up everything except for the name of Allah.
Yes, that will happen next week, inshallah, with the boycott. Yeah, the boycott tree was ripped up or eaten by insects, except the word Bismillah.
I wanted to ask about that. You mentioned that Abu Bakr is not the first who accepted Islam from the men's side.
Correct.
So, that Burqa bin Nawfal, is there any authentic hadith on that it's mentioned?
Yeah,
Because this is the first time I learned that this.
Yes. So
the popular thing is that Abu Bakr was.
The popular thing is Abu Bakr because Waraqah never officially, we don't have a narration that says, I testify that I'm worthy of worship except Allah. But his statement in this narration saying, if I were to, I would support you. Meaning he's acknowledging he's a prophet, that's one. So he's also a Sahabi. And the fact that the Prophet in another narration says, I saw Waraqah in Jannah with fine garments. Meaning he's in Jannah and he testified that the Prophet was a prophet. So that leads to believe that he was actually the first person. But he died way before the message got spread. So that's why there's no official. But Dr. Yasir does mention that Waraqah was the first one. Yeah.
Question is, before Prophet became, Islam came, what will happen to Abdul Muttalib, Prophet's father, mother?
So we don't really like to say clearly, but the Prophet did indicate that he was in the fire because they were pagans. Abdul Muttalib was a pagan, Abu Abdullah, his father, was a pagan, and his mother as well. Yeah, so that was the reality. But out of etiquette, we don't go ahead and say it. And Allah knows best. We never know what it is.
But even though the message didn't come that
Well, so there were people before the Prophet who were in Jannah, who were going to Jannah. One of them was the father of Sa'id ibn Zayd. Now, this man was, at the time before the Prophet came, he would tell people, stop worshipping idols. These idols, we have to go back to the way of our father Ibrahim. So at that time, they had people who were hunafa, people who worshipped the religion of the Hanif, which was the one God, one true God. But they didn't have the details of Islam because it had been lost. And so these people, Sa'id came to the Prophet one day. He says, what happened to my father? He said, I saw my father in Jannah. So there were people who were in Jannah before that because they didn't worship idols. Abu Bakr, growing up too, he didn't like to worship idols. His father would take him to the temple, and he never, it's said that he never prostrated to an idol. So there are people from the fitrah, from the just natural inclination, who didn't worship any idols. And anybody who didn't worship idols has a big chance of getting forgiveness from Allah, right? Allah says, I will forgive everything except shirk. So that gives hope to the shirk.
I was just going to add that if Allah wanted Abu Talib to be Muslim, he could have.
Abu Talib?
Yeah. That was during the time of Islam.
Yes, exactly.
But it was meant to be that.
Exactly. And we talked about this. Pride is a dangerous thing. You don't sense it, but what's it? The main sign of pride is when truth comes and it goes against what you want, you can't accept it. You just can't. Just like the Bani Israel, they knew exactly what the Messenger was. They was telling the people of Medina about him. But as soon as he came, they rejected the pride, didn't allow them to. And that's why it's dangerous. It doesn't let you go forward with the truth. And someone who's, like I said, tested with desires, sometimes he's more humble. Like someone who's going through addiction of some sort. But at least he'll say, I know Allah is the one deserving to be worshipped. He has that at least acceptance. And Allah can forgive him for his addictions or his issues. But someone with pride, he won't go forward. And that's Shaitan's main thing with pride. Seek refuge from that. And just the wahi that came, this is a contention. The Prophet was a Nabi and a Rasul. And some people have confused. They think just because he received wahi, automatically everybody receives wahi will be a prophet, or a messenger. And that's not true because in the Quran, the mother of Musa received wahi. And that was one of the ways of wahi. There's several ways the Prophet received revelation. One of the ways is the whispering of an angel, sort of to just tell you what to do. Like the wahi that Musa's mother received to throw him in the well, that doesn't make her a prophet. Or when some people say, well, what if you just see an angel and wahi comes to you? Like Maryam alayhi salam. She says, we inspired her to this way that I'm talking about. And she saw Jibreel, right, in the form of a man. Remember when he came to her and she says, fear Allah and fear Rahman and so forth? So does that constitute her being a prophet? There is an opinion that says women have prophets. Al-Qurtubi, Ibn Hazm, and others have said, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, that Maryam was a prophet. But there is a verse that clearly contradicts that. There's a difference of opinion, basically. But the strongest opinion is that it's not only wahi, but you have to, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to select you for a message. And the difference between a messenger and a Rasul, a prophet and a messenger, is that the prophet is sent to a people who are disbelievers, who reject him. So he has to call people. And a messenger is someone who is sent to a people, but not necessarily those who oppose him. He's just teaching them about a revelation. That's the strongest opinion. All the other opinions, there's holes in the theory. Like some people say, those who received a law versus those who didn't. But there are those who, like Dawood and Sulaiman, who are Rasuls, but they didn't receive a Sharia. If you look at the Psalm of David, it's all like praise. And he's following the Sharia of who? Of Musa. Dawood is following the Sharia of Musa. So the best theory and the best conclusion out of all the opinions is that a messenger, a Nabi, is someone who is sent by Allah, selected by Allah through revelation, and he's calling a people. But the Rasul is of higher caliber because he's calling a people who reject him, who who reject. And the five highest messengers, ulul azm min rusul, are, we know them, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Nuh, Ibrahim, Musa, Isa, and Muhammad. Okay, we make dua inshallah. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us good in this world and the hereafter, and to protect us from the fire. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us reach Ramadan in peace and tranquility and prosperity. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during this time and during that time to increase our iman and to help us to worship Him in the best possible way. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be followers of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal our sick and to have mercy upon our dead. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove from our hearts any evil inclination or any ghayb or hasad towards any believer. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give our brothers and sisters in Gaza and all over the Muslim world protection and relief from the distress. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to pour on them patience and to grant them dignity for those. We ask you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to help us be companions of the Quran. Allah loves to teach the Quran and to learn it and to give it to our children. Oh Allah, you are the one who can do this for us. We ask you and no one else. Allah, you are the best one to give victory. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah. Show us truth for what it really is and help us to follow it. Wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinabah. And show us falsehood for what it really is and help us to abstain from it. سبحانك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.